"You're lying." The words shot across the courtroom like a loaded weapon. Officer Jared Monroe glared from the witness stand, posture rigid, voice tight. He matched the suspect description: aggressive, uncooperative. I had no choice but to subdue him. He jabbed a finger toward the defense table. He resisted. Ask anyone. The room tensed. Every eye shifted to the man he pointed at. A calm, graying black man in a charcoal suit. Mid-50s. No lawyer. No papers. Just stillness. Raymond Ellis slowly looked up, his tone calm but deliberate. "I think there's a misunderstanding," he said, "and I intend to clarify it. Myself." The judge blinked. "You're representing yourself?" "Yes," Raymond replied, his voice soft but surgical. "This matter requires precision." What no one realized, the man they assumed was unprepared had written the very legal textbooks used by judges across the state. As we delve into the story, if you believe everyone should be treated with respect no matter what their color is, click the subscribe button now and tell us where you're watching from. Only those who ignore unfair moments scroll past. This story delivers the most powerful instant karma you've never seen coming this year. Raymond Ellis wasn't always alone in courtrooms. Decades ago, he stood at lecterns, not defense tables, teaching constitutional law to future judges, federal prosecutors, and civil rights advocates. His lectures were legendary at Eastwell University, not because he raised his voice, but because every word carried the weight of lived experience. Born and raised in 1970s Atlanta, Raymond came of age in a city that taught him early what silence could do, how it could crush, protect, or preserve, depending on who wielded it. He learned to read rooms before he read textbooks, and by the time he turned 30, he had authored Procedural Fairness and Equal Protection, a text still used to train new judges across the country. But brilliance couldn't shield him from injustice. Years ago, a close colleague, another black professor, was accused of misconduct without evidence. Raymond watched in horror as the institution that claimed to uphold justice folded under political pressure. The experience broke something in him. He left academia, stopped publishing, and vanished from public legal life. Until now. And now, he sat quietly at the defendant's table. No fanfare, no lawyer, no press. Just a weathered briefcase and a memory that hadn't dulled with time. Across the courtroom, Officer Jared Monroe projected control. At 38, he was the department's poster officer. Sharp uniform, spotless record, quick to take charge. But his eyes held something else, something colder. Monroe had made a career out of unquestioned authority in places where his badge gave him power, and his biases remained unchecked. He was polite when speaking to the judge, assertive when speaking to jurors, and dismissive when describing the defendant. When asked to identify Raymond, he didn't point. He gestured like one would toward a stranger on a subway. To Monroe, this case was simple. An older black man with no lawyer. Another file. Another win. 2 rows away, a white defendant sat, surrounded by legal support. 2 attorneys, 3 files, endless confidence. He laughed during breaks. He was offered coffee by the bailiff. The clerk smiled at him. Raymond received none of that. No water, no greeting, not even eye contact. But he noticed. He noticed it all. And he said nothing. Not yet. Have you ever felt misjudged before people even knew who you were? Type justice in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe now. Let your voice be louder than silence. Officer Jared Monroe adjusted his tie and leaned confidently into the microphone. "Rules are rules," he stated, his voice echoing through the courtroom with a smug finality. He resisted. We followed protocol. His badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, his tone cool, practiced. He glanced toward the jury box as if expecting them to nod along. To Monroe, this courtroom was no different from the streets he patrolled. His word was the law. Reports were accepted, not questioned. Defendants like Raymond were supposed to fade quietly into the docket, not challenge the story. The judge turned to the defense table. "Mr. Ellis, do you wish to cross-examine the witness?" There was a long pause. Then Raymond rose, slowly, deliberately. He buttoned his jacket with the care of a man preparing a lecture, not a confrontation. Monroe squinted. "You shouldn't be doing this," he called out from the stand, his voice just loud enough to slice the room in half. "You're not trained for this level of legal work." The implication was unmissable. You don't belong here. But Raymond only smiled, calm and unreadable. "We'll find out," he replied. In the gallery, a woman leaned forward in her seat. Jurors exchanged silent glances. One of them furrowed his brow. The prosecutor shifted uneasily in his chair, sensing the air was changing. Still, the room remained caught in tension's grip, hovering between disbelief and curiosity. And then the whispers began. "Why is he defending himself?" "Doesn't look like he knows what he's doing. He's just trying to get attention." The murmurs floated like dust across the chamber, each one layering assumption atop assumption. But Raymond didn't flinch, not once. Monroe leaned forward, voice sharper now. "I have years in the force. Your so-called defense won't stand. Up in court. Try me." It wasn't testimony anymore. It was a threat, veiled in the arrogance of unchallenged power. The court stenographer, mid-40s and quiet, stopped typing. She studied Raymond, then the judge, then back again. Something about this felt off. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Raymond opened his folder. Inside, handwritten notes, careful and composed. He looked up, gaze steady. "Think carefully about what you're saying, Officer Monroe," he said, "because your words will be tested against the law you swore to uphold." The courtroom froze. What would you do if this happened to you? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe. Officer Monroe's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You're twisting the facts. This is obstruction," he snapped, glaring across the courtroom at Raymond. The microphone barely caught the edge in his tone. It wasn't testimony anymore. It was intimidation. Monroe leaned forward as if proximity added weight to his words, puffing up like a man trying to reassert his dominance after a stumble. His eyes dared Raymond to push further, but something in his voice, something brittle, betrayed that the mask of confidence was cracking, and then the room fell still. Not just quiet, still. No coughs, no chair creaks. Even the court reporter, who'd been typing dutifully for most of the morning, stopped mid-stroke and looked up. The gallery, packed with passive faces, held its breath. The judge didn't speak. He just narrowed his eyes. Everyone in that room could feel it. Tension rising like steam inside a sealed pot, hissing just beneath the surface. Raymond didn't flinch. Standing tall, he adjusted his glasses, flipped a page in his folder, and looked at Monroe as if reviewing a student's failed exam. "I've done nothing wrong," he said, his voice perfectly even. "And I have the law here with me to prove it." He didn't yell. He didn't posture. But somehow, it echoed louder than Monroe's outburst. The silence that followed was less about pause and more about respect, unspoken and reluctantly given. Then, quietly, Raymond tapped an envelope, tucked behind his folder. The seal on it glinted under the lights. Official, unopened, unread. He didn't explain it. He didn't even touch it again. But everyone saw it, and suddenly, questions began forming behind the eyes in the room. In the third row, a black law student clenched her fists in her lap. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she stopped herself. She looked at Monroe, then at Raymond. She knew that feeling, the weight of speaking up against the expected. She bit her lip and looked down, furious at her own fear. 2 rows up, a woman in pearls leaned toward her friend. He should just sit down before he embarrasses himself. She whispered. The friend tilted her head. No, she replied. He's smarter than they think. For the first time, the courtroom didn't divide by rows. It divided by values, and it was starting to show. Raymond paused mid-question, looked at Monroe, then at the judge, and said absolutely nothing. It was a silence that dared the courtroom to sit with itself. And the discomfort in the stillness said more than words could. A juror in her 60s folded her arms and leaned forward slightly. Her face remained still, but her eyes focused. She had lived through enough to know when someone was being disrespected, and when someone was fighting back with something deeper than rage. She saw Raymond for what he was, prepared. Monroe panicked. Your Honor, this man is stalling. He's not a real attorney, he barked, pointing a trembling finger. The edges of his voice cracked like breaking glass. His control wasn't slipping. It was gone. This is your final chance, Monroe hissed directly at Raymond. You're walking into a charge of contempt. The threat rang out across the chamber, not whispered anymore, but hurled like a warning shot. The court buzzed with murmurs. From the back, someone snorted. Bet he Googled all that last night, they said under their breath, loud enough for a ripple of laughter to follow. A few chuckled, a few didn't. But the disrespect wasn't subtle anymore. It was public. And then the piling on began. Why doesn't he have a lawyer if he's so smart? This is probably just a performance. The gallery grew bold in its judgment. Volume replaced analysis. Groupthink tightened its grip. Raymond calmly lifted a legal codebook from his briefcase. This is Article 14, procedural bias and arrest accountability, he said, his tone still composed. He began citing precedent, but Monroe scoffed so, loudly it drowned the citation. No objection, just noise. The law student leaned forward again, her voice barely a whisper. If he asks for support, I'm in. She didn't even realize she'd said it aloud. The moment had pushed past her hesitation. Monroe slammed his fist on the witness stand. This isn't a debate, he roared. A few people jumped. The judge looked over his glasses, not surprised, but disappointed. And then came the final insult. The judge called a recess. Water was passed to the attorneys, the witnesses, even the clerk. Everyone, except Raymond, he sat alone. Dry, silent, but still watching, still calculating. Would you stay calm or speak out when the world turns silent around you? Comment below. If this chapter made your heart race, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone. The courtroom doors had barely closed behind the returning judge when Officer Monroe stepped down from the stand. He moved across the room to retrieve a document, but not without intention. As he passed Raymond's seat, he veered just enough to shoulder check him. The shove wasn't forceful, but it was deliberate. Raymond staggered slightly, catching himself on the table's edge. He didn't speak. He didn't react. But Monroe did. Leaning in, he whispered just low enough to be missed by the bench, but loud enough for those nearest to hear. Know your place. The chill that followed was immediate. But Monroe, unfazed, straightened up and turned toward the judge. Apologies, Your Honor, he said, feigning professionalism. He was standing in the way. Gasps filled the air. A few people in the gallery leaned forward. The accusation was as flimsy as it was calculated. Raymond turned, slowly, deliberately. His eyes found Monroe's, steady and unshaken. I've only asked for equal treatment, he said, his voice low but sharp. That seems to offend you more than anything I've said in court. His tone wasn't angry. It was surgical, and it cut deep. Monroe's jaw twitched. People always play the victim, he barked, louder than he likely meant to. The words echoed, and the silence that followed was deafening. The judge, halfway to his gavel, froze. A woman in the front row gasped. One juror started scribbling. Another just shook his head, lips pressed tight. The line had been crossed. Raymond stepped forward, not to escalate, but to end it. "You just made a mistake you'll regret," he said quietly. "Because today, you didn't just lie. You revealed who you are." Then he sat down, calm, unbothered, in full control. When someone stays calm under pressure, do you think it's weakness or strategy? Comment with your take. And if you feel the shift coming, hit like and subscribe to stay ahead of the reveal. Raymond rose slowly, this time not with hesitation, but with presence. His shoulders squared, his voice firm yet even. "I've tolerated enough," he said, addressing the jury directly, his gaze sharp and unwavering. "No more interruptions, no more misdirection, just the facts and the law." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even a request. It was a declaration. The room shifted with him. The air thickened, and something intangible cracked beneath the weight of his certainty. Monroe shot up from his seat like a flame-catching wind. "You're turning this into a spectacle," he barked, looking toward the judge with manufactured indignation. "This man is manipulating the room. I was just doing my job." But the way he said it, too fast, too breathless, revealed the unraveling beneath. His composure had frayed, and now he was stitching together authority with panic. Raymond remained, still. With one smooth motion, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a worn folder, placing a single document on the table in front of him. He didn't explain it, he didn't announce it, but the courtroom leaned in as one. Even the judge tilted slightly forward. The silence wasn't confusion. It was anticipation. Something had changed. In the gallery, the law student, the same one who'd clenched her fists during Monroe's earlier aggression, stood. She walked down the side aisle quietly and handed a folded note to the bailiff. He opened it, eyes widening almost instantly, and exited through a side door without saying a word. Several heads turned. A ripple of whispers danced across the back rows. Monroe's eyes followed the bailiff with growing alarm. "Who did you just send out?" he barked, pointing a trembling hand toward Raymond. "Was that you?" But Raymond remained silent, seated now, calm as ever. He didn't nod. He didn't blink. He didn't need to. His silence was the answer, and it was louder than any yes. One juror, who had sat motionless all day, finally shifted forward. The prosecutor objected weakly, stumbling through his words. "Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant." But his voice cracked mid-sentence. Somewhere in the back, a quiet voice whispered, "He's not just defending himself, he's orchestrating something." The words weren't loud, but they landed like bricks. Raymond turned to Monroe again, his eyes unblinking. "This isn't about protocol," he said. "It's about how you decide who deserves respect and who doesn't." The room absorbed his words like heat into dry earth. He wasn't just talking to Monroe. He was talking to the judge, to the jury, to every soul in the room who had allowed silence to look like neutrality. And then Monroe cracked. "Some people just don't deserve it," he spat. "That's reality." The words echoed, vulgar and raw. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the gallery. One juror covered her mouth in disbelief. Another wrote furiously, head shaking. The judge's face tightened, as if unsure whether to scold or simply let the fallout speak for itself. Monroe had crossed the line, not privately, not quietly, but publicly, and irrevocably. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. The court reporter, who had kept up with every syllable until now, stopped typing entirely. A pencil rolled off someone's desk and clattered on the floor. Even that felt loud. All eyes, every single one, turned to Raymond. They didn't just expect a response. They needed one, and he gave it, without saying a word. Raymond calmly reached for the sealed envelope he had previously set aside. This time, he placed it gently before the judge, sliding it forward with quiet finality. Then he locked eyes with Monroe. "You're right," he said. "Actions do have consequences." And then, like a man who knew the power of a well-placed period, he sat down. If this moment made your heart race, hit the like button and type, "I believe in justice," in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories that speak truth. The courtroom froze. Not a whisper, not a shuffle, just stillness. Even the court reporter, who had typed relentlessly all day, paused mid-keystroke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was electric, heavy, charged with the weight of everything unspoken. Something had shifted, and everyone in that room knew it. Raymond reached into his satchel with the ease of a man who had already won. He pulled out a phone, unlocked it, and placed it face up on the defense table. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His intent was quiet but unmistakable. Monroe rose sharply, voice cracking. "What exactly are you doing?" The panic in his tone betrayed the authority he once wielded. Raymond didn't even look at him. "You'll understand soon." "Enough," he said softly, just as the bailiff returned with someone unfamiliar at his side. If you felt the energy shift in this scene, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe silence can be stronger than shouting. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom like distant thunder, the kind of sound people make when they don't fully understand what they're sensing, but know something irreversible is coming. "Something's happening," a woman near the back whispered, nudging her friend. "Look at Monroe's face." And they did. The smug confidence that had cloaked the officer earlier had been replaced by something else. Pale, tight-jawed. He was watching the doors now, waiting, bracing. In the gallery, the young black law student clutched her notebook. Her fingers had stopped writing pages ago. She didn't need more notes. She needed to witness what was unfolding. What Raymond had just done wasn't courtroom strategy. It was a dismantling of hierarchy, word by word, page by page. He wasn't just defending himself, he was rewriting the moral structure of the room. The double doors at the rear creaked open. All heads turned. A woman in a dark federal uniform entered first. Her eyes were focused, her stride purposeful. Behind her walked a senior official from the State Attorney General's office. The judge sat up straighter in his chair, posture tightening with sudden formality, and Officer Monroe froze. The federal agent moved to the front and addressed the bench with calm authority. "Your Honor," she said, voice cutting through the tension. "This individual, Raymond Ellis, is not only qualified to represent himself. He is a former senior advisor to the United States Department of Justice." The words dropped like thunder. The courtroom gasped. The weight of every assumption shattered in an instant. Gasps swelled. People whispered furiously. One juror leaned to another, wide-eyed. "I knew it," she said. "No regular man talks like that." The courtroom clerk blinked slowly, mouthing the word, "Professor." It spread like a wave, realization replacing judgment. Raymond stood slowly, the way you rise when your dignity no longer needs permission. "For years," he said evenly, "I trained the minds that draft police reform policy. I taught federal judges about accountability and restraint." He turned toward Monroe. "I stepped away, until today." His voice didn't carry volume, it carried weight, and this time, it was no longer a defendant speaking. It was a teacher, a witness, a quiet authority. Monroe's face drained of color. His mouth opened as if to speak, then closed. He looked around, scanning for someone, anyone, to meet his eyes. But no one did, not even the prosecutor. The Attorney General's official stepped forward. "This court is now under state-level observation," she said. "Effective immediately. Officer Monroe's conduct is under formal review." The words struck like hammer blows. No theatrics. Just justice finally catching up. Raymond didn't react. He simply nodded. No smile. No gloating. He let the truth speak, as he always had, with precision, not performance. Silence had never been his weakness. It had always been his weapon. Two plainclothes officials entered from the side, weaving through the gallery until they reached Monroe. One leaned in. "Please, step aside," he said. "You'll be giving a formal statement shortly." Monroe stood frozen, the badge on his chest suddenly feeling heavier than his pride. Raymond turned to him one final time. "You led with ego," he said. "Not justice. And justice listens before it judges." The words hung there, a correction Monroe had never expected and could never unhear. Then, from somewhere near the back, a slow clap began. Just one person, then another, and another. It wasn't rowdy, it wasn't celebratory. It was relief, measured, grounded, and righteous. Even the judge didn't call for order. He just watched. Quietly, Raymond turned to the gallery. "You made assumptions," he said, his voice clear. "Assumptions rooted in uniform, in race, in power." He looked toward the jury. "Let this courtroom remember, the law belongs to everyone, not just the loudest, not just the protected." Monroe stood alone now, no defense, no fallback. Even the stenographer, who had so carefully recorded his every word, wouldn't meet his eyes. His presence no longer commanded anything. He turned suddenly, moving toward the courtroom exit, his head low. A last-ditch attempt to leave with fragments of his pride, but he didn't get far. "Please remain where you are," the federal agent said, stepping into his path. Monroe stopped mid-step, slowly turned, nowhere left to run. "You're suspended from field duty," the official declared, "effective immediately pending investigation." The badge was removed from his chest, swift, cold, irrevocable. The final blow came next. "Due to your racial bias and sworn false statements," the rep added, "you will also face federal deposition for civil rights violation." The room gasped, not in surprise, but in release. The shift had completed. The system had been cracked, open, and held accountable. Monroe muttered weakly. It wasn't personal. But his voice was paper-thin now. Raymond didn't blink. "It became personal," he replied, "the moment you made it public. In uniform." He turned to the rest of the courtroom. "To anyone affected today, I'm sorry you had to witness injustice, but I'm glad you saw justice respond." His words didn't beg for applause. They were an offering, a reckoning. As he walked past the gallery, Raymond paused by the law student, the same one who almost spoke up earlier. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We need more eyes, like yours in the system," he said. She teared up but nodded, straightening her spine. Raymond walked toward the doors. There was no clapping this time, no noise, just a room full of people watching a man walk in dignity. The silence had returned, but now it wasn't coated in judgment. It was filled with respect. Should people who abuse their power be forgiven? Or should they face the full consequences? Drop your take in the comments, and if this story hit you, like and subscribe. Outside the courthouse, the air was lighter, though the memory of what had transpired inside still lingered like heat after a storm. Raymond Ellis stepped down the front steps alone, his briefcase in hand, when a voice called softly behind him. "Sir." A young man in his 20s approached, his shirt tucked in too tightly, his nervous hands wringing together. "I've never seen anyone do what you did in there. Thank you." Raymond offered a small, quiet nod. His eyes, warm but unreadable, studied the man's sincerity. "I didn't do it for the applause," he said. "I did it because silence helps no one." Within hours, the courtroom footage had reached millions. A simple clip, Raymond calmly placing a sealed envelope on the table, spread like wildfire. His voice, measured and unwavering, cutting through Monroe's arrogance, became a symbol. "That man's a legend," one comment read. "This is how you dismantle racism, with knowledge and composure." Another echoed, "We need Raymond Ellis in every courtroom." It wasn't the spectacle that moved people. It was the steadiness, the clarity, the idea that you could be powerful without ever having to raise your voice. Later that week, Raymond sat across from a journalist during a televised interview. "You never raised your voice once," she said. "Why?" He leaned in, as he always did when preparing to teach. "Because too often, black men aren't heard unless they shout. I wanted them to hear me while I whispered the truth." He paused for a moment, his words deliberate. Respect shouldn't be conditional. Everyone deserves it, regardless of assumptions. The host, caught off guard, sat in silence as Raymond addressed the viewers. "If you're ever in a place where no one sees you, don't shrink," he said. "You don't need their permission. To be powerful, stand in what you know, even when they act like you don't belong." The words didn't land like advice. They landed like legacy. A week later, Raymond returned to the same courthouse. This time, not as a defendant, not even as counsel. He had been invited as a keynote speaker on judicial equity, and when he walked in, the bailiff who once ignored him stood straight and nodded. One officer opened the door without hesitation. No one asked for his credentials. They already knew who he was. Outside, as he approached his car, he heard quick footsteps behind him. The law student from the gallery caught up, breathless. "I'm applying to clerk under a judge," she said, "because of what I saw that day." Raymond smiled, proud but not surprised. "Good," he replied. "Then my legacy just started growing legs." He looked up at the courthouse, its walls, its doors, its memory. Sometimes the smallest shifts become the biggest legacies. If this story reminded you that dignity belongs to everyone, not just the powerful, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that message. What lesson stood out most to you? Let us know below.